look into potential Russian collusion. Detail for us how central she is to this investigation.
She is, one of the longest-serving people who've been around Trump, outside of his family. She's been within the Trump...
Let me correct that. Investigates with the House Intelligence Committee, but go ahead.
She's been with Trump for 30 years. She is the person through which phone calls would, you would call Rona and she would patch you into Donald Trump. She's the conduit to him throughout many of his ups and downs in his business career. So she's very close to Trump. She knows Trump very well. She's been loyal to Trump. And so I do think that she is one of those people who, could potentially shed some light on Trump's past interactions with Russians. She was not part of the campaign apparatus as much. There's other aides who were around him at that time. But she is a person who knows Trump and who knows his world quite well. She wasn't necessarily inside some of those meetings, but she would have been setting them up.
Margaret, to you, we learned from CNN's Jeff Zeleny that the president did want to hold that traditional end-of-the-year news conference before heading off to Mar-a-Lago, but his advisors told him that he shouldn't because they expected he would besieged, by their term, by questions about the Russia investigation, and likely he would have. By that logic, considering that the investigation could stretch deep into 2018, are we not going to see a news conference from the president for most of next year? Will he not do a non-Fox News interview? I mean, there has to be a better strategy than avoid questions.
Well, certainly we'll be looking for this. We had been encouraging the White House to do that end-of-year news conference, although I have to say I wasn't terribly surprised at the reluctance to do so. It, of course, would have turned into several questions about issues that had nothing to do with the tax bill, and the tax bill is what the president wanted, or his team wanted, to end the note on message-wise. But look, I think it is instructive that since those first round of interviews in the first 100 days, you've seen far fewer interviews with the president. You haven't seen the sort of traditional news conferences that allow a real give and take, a real substantive discussion of the issues. The president has really preferred these last-minute shouted questions in the Oval Office, or even most favorite outside as he's getting ready to board the helicopter, the drama, the sense of urgency, the choppers, the background noise, and it allows him to control the conversation a little bit more. His aides concerned that if he did a full news conference, 8 or 9 questions, that he might decide to answer some of those questions, and that it would take on a life of its own. So, but I hope in the new year that that he continues the tradition of news conferences. It's important for transparency. It's important so that Americans know what he's thinking on some of these issues beyond the sound bites that we've been able to get in these rushed conversations. But it's complicated. Yeah,
the last television interview that was not on Fox News was back in May with Lester Holt, when he revealed what he was thinking when he fired James Comey, and the last formal news conference was in February. So it's been quite a long time. Margaret Taloff and Matt Visor, thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, a former Marine is accused of planning to attack San Francisco during the holidays. We have details on how the alleged plot was stopped.
And almost 30 million people under a winter weather alert. Potentially dangerous travel conditions could really make their plans difficult. We'll talk about those.
And overcoming the odds, how a homeless high school football player led his team to victory with the help of his coach, both on and off the field.
I just felt that when I had someone caring for me, I felt like it made me do better in school, and it made me want to do better in life.
On a fateful day, 2 of Mitsubishi's safest siblings were separated. The Roberts
CNN poll, the majority of Americans say the fight against ISIS is going well, and more than 40% approve how President Trump is handling terrorism. But at the same time, 70% say that people say that they are worried about an impending attack on U.S. soil. Here to break this all down, we have Samantha Vinograd, a CNN national security analyst and former senior advisor to the National Security Advisor, and CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Sam, I want to begin with you. Again, the majority of Americans say that Trump is doing very well when it comes to the war on ISIS. However, when you look at their concerns about attacks here on U.S. soil, they don't feel as confident. How do you explain that contrast?
Thanks. Well, it's interesting. I actually started my career in Iraq working with Lieutenant General Hertling on things like counterterrorism, and we thought we had a lot of success against terrorists there, and then they came back. And I think that really underscores the point that military strikes and kinetic operations are a very important part of a counterterrorism strategy around the world. That's why, for example, the global coalition that's fighting ISIS, it's about 74 countries, has included a lot of military strikes against ISIS, while at the same time focusing on things like stemming the flow of foreign fighters and countering ISIS propaganda. Now, I think that the polling underscores the fact that we have had military success against ISIS. The Iraqi Prime Minister declared Iraq as fully liberated from ISIS a few weeks ago. President Trump and President Putin have also said that Syria has been cleared of ISIS, but that doesn't necessarily make us safer. Here in New York City alone, we've had 2 terrorist attacks over the last several weeks that were inspired by ISIS online. So despite the fact that we have deprived ISIS of physical safe havens, which is a very significant achievement, they still have the capability to manipulate the digital space. And we really need to double down on our operations online to combat ISIS's capability to reach people through the internet.
Lieutenant General Hertling, to you, I mean, we've heard the administration's plans for battling ISIS and also ways that they believe they can best protect the homeland. I mean, the president has focused a lot on immigration sort of policies, whether it's the travel ban, whether it's the wall, as ways to protect the homeland. But we haven't heard the administration talk that much about that focus of those homegrown terrorists who are inspired by ISIS. What do they need to do?
Well, you know, I think, Renee, first of all, good morning. I think one of the key things, and Sam hit it very well, is terror knows no politics. So this poll that you cited, I found it very interesting as I read through it, where it said less likely to anticipate terror when the president is a member of your preferred party. That's just silliness, because as terrorists will strike when they want to and how they want to. And what we've seen with ISIS in Iraq and Syria, they certainly have been decimated in terms of their ability to conduct a conventional fight and also to hold on to cities. But as you just said, there are a lot of homegrown terrorists. There are continued emphasis on cyber terrorism, as Sam mentioned. And I would suggest that the conventional fight against ISIS might be, we might have been successful, but I think we're going to see them go into a new phase of operation, as we have seen many times before, where some of the terrorists who were not killed are going to go into the deserts and the riverbanks and the mountains of Iraq and Syria and continue to fight on. And they will re-evolve unless something is done beyond the military means, which we've been talking about for several years. It's got to be a fight against the ideology of ISIS and extreme Islamism.
Because Sam, we haven't heard from the administration their plan for how to deal with those homegrown, inspired sort of attacks, similar to what we saw in New York City in that subway station.
Exactly, and I don't doubt that there is extensive work underway in this space. I just think we need to fundamentally reorganize ourselves when it comes to combating extremism online. I worked for the U.S. Treasury Department, and there was a dedicated entity that worked on countering threat finance and terrorists' ability to manipulate financial infrastructure. I think we need something very similar in the digital space, but at the same time, to your point earlier, we have to stop focusing on the wrong enemy. And all of this talk about a travel ban and a border wall is frankly a distraction and a misallocation of resources. The 2 terrorist attacks that we saw here in the United States, in New York, over the past several weeks were from people, yes, they were immigrants to the United States, but from what we know at this point, they were radicalized domestically. So talking about keeping them out of the country doesn't get to the fact that they were radicalized from within the United States when they were reading content within the United States. as immigrants to this country. So I think we need to be very clear about where we're trying to strike the threat and not distract attention and resources away from that objective.
Okay, really quickly, the president rolled out his national security strategy this week. Let's take a listen.
We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth. We will attempt to build a great partnership with those and other countries, but in a manner that always protects our national interest.
Well, he singled out Russia as one of the rival powers. It seems to have ruffled Putin's feathers, Putin calling it aggressive. Does this escalate really quickly, Lieutenant Hertling?
It does not. The national security strategy is driven by the intelligence community and what they know. And truthfully, Renee, I've been talking, when I was commander in Europe, I've been talking about the Russian expansionism threat. And the president in this national security calls it a revisionist power, attempting to create discord among the West. And it's been true since about 2008, when Russia attacked into Georgia. They have continually attempted to disrupt the Western powers and the world order to their advantage. So no, it's not. It is contrary to what the president has been saying verbally, so that there is a disconnect between what he is saying in the paper of the NSS and what he's saying verbally. But it is not at all contrary to what we've believed for the last 10 or so years.
All right, Samantha Vinograd and Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The FBI says it stopped the terror plot planned for San Francisco. They said the person who was planning it, a former Marine who pledged allegiance to ISIS. We'll tell you what they say he wanted to do.
Plus, dangerous travel conditions are shaping up for the holidays. Welcome back. I'm Renee Marsh, in for Christy Paul.
I'm Victor Blackwell. The FBI says its agents have averted a terror attack that was planned for San Francisco. A former U.S. Marine is accused of plotting an attack at Pier 39 during the holiday season.
Well, Everett Aaron Jameson told an undercover FBI investigator that he wanted to show his support for ISIS. CNN's justice correspondent Jessica Schneider has the details.
The FBI has thwarted a plot that targeted San Francisco around the holidays. Authorities say Everett Aaron Jameson was plotting to stage an attack on Pier 39 in San Francisco sometime over this Christmas holiday. And the FBI agents who were tracking him online saying he was modeling his planned attack on those over the past few years, including San Bernardino and most recently in New York City. In fact, Jameson voiced his support for that truck attack in New York City on October 31st. That was when 8 people were killed on a bike path. And then the complaint says Jameson recently became a tow truck driver in his hometown of Modesto, California, leading to concerns that he could attempt that exact same type of attack that we saw in New York City. Now, the criminal complaint also details the letter that authorities found inside his home under a search warrant this week. The letter said things like, "You all brought this upon yourselves," and "You've allowed Donald J. Trump to give away Al-Quds to the Jews." That's a reference to Jerusalem. Also, he said, "We have penetrated and infiltrated your disgusting country." Now, top officials here in the U.S. have been warning as recently as last month about this danger of a possible uptick in ISIS-inspired attacks right here in the U.S., especially with the collapse of the Islamic State's caliphate. The FBI did a search of Jameson's home in Modesto, California. That's just 90 miles from San Francisco. And they found firearms, empty magazines, ammunition, and fireworks. Jameson is now in custody. Jessica Schneider, CNN, Washington.
Well, California's Modesto Bee says that Jameson's attorney has denied the allegations contained in the affidavit. Well, potentially dangerous travel conditions this holiday weekend for millions of Americans.
Let's bring in CNN meteorologist Allison Chinchar. Allison, is there any way to know who's seeing the worst of it when?
Right now, it would be the area around Boston and just to the west of that, because they're actually just getting straight ice, which is the last thing you want, not only when you're talking about air travel, but definitely on the roads. Here you can see it's that purple color. We've got some purple and pink indicating ice or that wintry mix. Then you've got a lot of rain stretching all the way back towards Cincinnati and the snow that's just behind that. This system is going to continue to push off to the east as we go through the rest of the day. So cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Pittsburgh, those are all going going to be cities that are impacted by this. So what does that mean in terms of your actual travel plans? So we take a look at what we've got in terms of potential delays going forward throughout the day, because as we talk, there's a lot of cities that could be under that risk today. Boston, JFK, stretching down to D.C., but notice how far south. We're even talking cities like Charlotte and Atlanta. Now, tomorrow, that system pushes out, and the next system begins to take shape over areas of the Midwest. We're talking cities like Chicago, Detroit, and even around Cincinnati. Now, then the turn becomes what happens on actual Christmas Day. The thing of it is, the majority of the country is actually going to start to see their temperatures drop. We're talking New York City, for example. Take a look at this, going from 54 today down to 39 for the high temperature on Christmas Day. Now, the cool down is also going to impact areas of the upper Midwest, cities like Minneapolis, Green Bay. But the other thing is, with those colder temperatures brings chances for snow. So when we take a look at a city like Chicago, again, temperature's not too bad in the upper 20s to lower 30s. But look at Christmas Eve. Victor and Renee, we've got a chance for snow Christmas Eve, so that may mean a lot of folks in Chicago waking up Christmas morning to some fresh new snow.
I like that.
I think it.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Allison.
All right, still to come, to avoid a government shutdown this year, Senate Democrats had to cave on a DACA fix. Now, the Hispanic Caucus and DACA recipients, activists as well, are reeling after Democrats postponed action on the DACA program for the third time this year. There was no fix in the September short-term spending bill, no fix in the 2-week spending bill that passed on December 8th, no fix on the spending bill on Thursday before the government ran out of funding. Democratic leaders insist they have a strategy to pass a DACA fix in January. However, will they deliver on the promises, though, and when? Here with me to discuss, CNN political commentator Maria Cardona and chairman of the National Bar Association, PAC, and former D.C. Democratic Party chairman A. Scott Bolden. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning, Victor.
So let's start here, Maria, with what we heard from Minority Leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, earlier this year in November.
I'll have to see what the spending bill is, but I fully intend that we will not leave here without the DREAM Act passing, with a DACA fix. And I've made that very clear.
We will not leave. Well, they left and it didn't happen. Explain how this is not a promise broken here.
Well, first of all, let's remember that Democrats do not control Congress. They don't control the House. They don't control the Senate. Right. They have very limited leverage.
But she knew that when she said it.
Sure, but what she was doing was certainly pushing not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. Let's remember there are many Republicans who have also made the promise to fix DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, for almost 1 million kids who came here through no fault of their own, who now, thanks to President Trump, who, you know, took that protection away from them, are now in limbo. And so what she was voicing, which is still the case today, is that protecting these dreamers, as we call them, is a huge priority for Democrats, is a huge priority for American voters. And the hope was that Republicans would also make sure that this was a priority for them. We know that many of them support this. There is a bipartisan bill in Congress right now that if Republicans had the political will to put it on the floor right now, it would pass overwhelmingly with bipartisan support.
There's also Jeff Flake who said that in voting for the tax cut that he got some confirmation that there would be a DACA fix as well. So there is bipartisanship in the Senate as well. Let me get to Scott because I don't have a whole lot of time here. Sure. But this obviously is something that has bipartisan support, as Maria pointed out, and we pointed out in the Senate. But if if Republicans say yes, there will be a DACA fix, there will be protection for these roughly 800,000 undocumented peoples in this country who came here as children, no fault of their own, but we want money to start building this wall. Is that a fair exchange?
It's not a fair exchange, quite frankly.
But should Democrats take it?
Well, if the Democrats what? I'm sorry.
Should Democrats take that deal?
Of course not. They ought not take that deal because this has bipartisan support if they can get it to the floor. And remember, this isn't over. January 19th is when that spending bill is up and they'll have to do another take. And Schumer has given a commitment to 17 or 18 Hispanic members of the House, as well as some others in the Senate, that they're going to lay the law down, or they're going to lay down the law on this. But this is about political capital. And the Democrats are committed to spending political capital on this. There's some Republicans as well. And remember, the backdrop of all of this is 2018, and that's as important for the Republicans as it is for the Democrats on this DACA issue.
All right, Scott, let me stay with you. And Doug Jones, Senator-elect from Alabama, is heading to the Senate in January. And there was an open letter signed by 20 organizations that worked to get out the vote for Doug Jones in that special election just a couple of weeks ago. I want to read a line from it. The ticker tape for Jones' victory has barely been swept from the floor, and we are already seeing him pandering to the right and stepping away from the interest of the people who elected him. Just a couple of days ago, he had to walk back what he told Jake Tapper, that it's time to move on from the sexual harassment allegations against the president, and some in the Senate who have said that the president should resign. Are you concerned about the degree to which Doug Jones will fulfill those promises he made to Democrats to win this race, considering how conservative, how ruby red of a state Alabama is and what you're seeing from him already?
I'm not worried yet, and I hope I won't get worried once he gets in. This is hardcore politics, and Doug Jones' win was a great win for the Democrats, certainly better than Roy Moore being there. But here's the deal. He's in a very, very difficult situation because he's coming from a red state. African Americans and others voted to support him. He owes a lot of people, and he owes a lot of people who aren't ruby red, if you will. So he's going to have to balance that act, support those who supported him. It's going to be tough, but we have to keep politicians like Jones accountable, and we have to press them and make them vote the way we want them to vote to support what's in our best interest and usually what's in the best interest of America. We'll see.
Maria, he's up again in 2020, just filling out the re-election from Jeff Sessions back in 2014, so he's going to be back on the ballot again. Your degree of concern, considering what we've seen in just the short couple of weeks since the election?
Well, I would echo what Scott said. He is completely in a very difficult position, and he does have a tightrope act he has to perform here in the next 2 years. But I am going to give him confidence and the benefit of the doubt, because he is from Alabama. He is from the communities that supported him. He understands the issues that are important to the voters of Alabama, and he ran a fantastic campaign. And I believe that the relationships that he has actually nurtured for decades on the ground are relationships that he will continue to respect, and that he will mirror the issues that are important to most Alabama voters. And like Scott said, what's important to most Alabama voters, the economy, health care. I do believe these issues of sexual allegations will be front and center as well. And Scott mentioned, or I'm sorry, Doug Jones mentioned that this was going to be something that, moving forward, he agreed that these women need to be heard. So all of these issues, I think, are issues that will help him going into his re-election campaign, which will be tough but doable.
All right, Maria Cardona, Scott Bolden, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Well, up next, proof that one person truly can help turn a child's life around. See how a high school football coach opened up his heart and his home to one of his players. You don't want to miss this remarkable story.
May God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others. Let others do for you. Build a ladder to the stars.
Long live tradition. Long live the trucks capable of...
Gallagher explains how the head football coach stepped up to be more than a coach and helped his star player achieve his potential.
A senior quarterback with a 95-yard touchdown run to win the state championship game. Leading a team that just 2 years ago had a 1-10 record to their first state title in more than 60 years.
He's not eligible? Like, I was like blown away because he's so smart.
But he didn't have the grades to play.
When he told me that, I didn't show any emotions, but like once I got home, I just cried for like 2 days straight.
Home, a complicated word in Brahim's life back then.
I had to be on my own at times, and sometimes I'll stay at my friend's house. Me and my sister stay at my friend's house. We were going back and forth.
We're homeless.
Yeah, basically, I wasn't stable in a stable home.
When he was 5 years old, Brahim lost his mother to a brain aneurysm.
After that, it's just like everything went downhill. My dad loves me and everything, but we were just going through problems.
Coach Greiner started to notice that when he dropped Brahim off at home, it was never the same place twice.
Eventually, he just opened up to me, and he was like, you know, I have to stay with my sister from place to place. And I didn't know what to do at times, so I go into my office and I start thinking, I'm like, God, something's tugging at my heart.
Now, Sam Greiner has spent years talking faith, family, and football. So he called his wife, Connie. It was time to practice what he preached.
So he stayed with us. We had dinner a couple of times with him, and I mean, I fell in love.
And their daughters, Charlie and Journey, just 2 and 3 years old at the time, absolutely smitten with a new big brother. So when it came down to that little life-changing question...
He's like, is it okay if I just stay here with you guys for a little bit? I said, Brahim, you can stay here as long as you want. And 2 years later, you know. Will you do me a favor? Yeah.
It was an adjustment, but it worked.
I just felt that when I had someone caring for me, I felt like it made me do better in school, and it made me want to do better in life, you know.
His grades shot up, straight A's. Brahim said in finding a family, he also found faith.
Once I met God, that's...
Love him. I couldn't be more proud of him. I mean,
He's doing a family tree changer. I never had an opportunity to go to West Point. He's better than me. Connie's trying to go to college right now to do her career. And one day we'll probably be working for our own son.
In Charlotte, North Carolina, Diane Gallagher, CNN.
Told you it was worth it.
Yeah, angels on earth.
All right, still ahead, the story behind the story of A Christmas Carol, how Charles Dickens brought iconic characters like Tiny Tim, Ebenezer Scrooge.
How Dickens brought these characters to life to create the Christmas classic.
In a gilded frame, 3 little photographs of the grizzled old literary lion. This is Dickens as we remember him, looking older than his years, simply worn out and probably conscious of it. He died at just 58. The Dickens Museum in London is in a Georgian terrace in Bloomsbury, with a requisite blue plaque. This is 48 Doughty Street, the house he rented as a young married man. Here on display are some of his writing tools, his quill and inkwell, his magnifying glass, his cigar box, and something that went with him every time he moved home. It's naturally showing its age, but this is Charles Dickens's actual writing desk. It's where he wrote Nicholas Nickleby, Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, and this rather handsome little volume. This is a proof copy of Christmas Carol, published on December 19th, 1843. 6,000 copies. They sold out on Christmas Eve. It's a beautiful object, finely bound, gold lettering on the front and spine. The first story that Dickens ever published directly as a book, rather than in serial form in a periodical. The illustrations by John Leach, a young caricaturist with Punch magazine, 4 in colour. The museum is currently showing Leach's initial pencil sketches, the first faint apparition of that wonderfully named miser, Ebenezer Scrooge. Being Dickens, our story is naturally a tale of 2 cities. New York is celebrating him this Christmas too, with a special exhibition at the Morgan Library.
So this is the original manuscript of A Christmas Carol, and you see these very clotted pages where they're heavily revised. He's changing his mind, he's going back, but it's all pouring out of him. The level of artistic energy there, I think, is almost sort of bouncing off the page when you look at it.
It's somehow thrilling to see the names in Dickens's own almost illegible hand. Ebenezer Scrooge, Bob Cratchit, and of course Tiny Tim. Now, would you have recognised Dickens from this, the earliest known photograph, a daguerreotype from 1850? He was then 38. In his 40s and 50s, A Christmas Carol became one of his favourite readings in his celebrated tours.
They were like rock concerts, his readings. I mean, people just were so thrilled to be in his actual physical presence. The fact that he was also a brilliant actor was such a huge bonus. People could scarcely believe their luck.
Dickens's farewell American tour in the late 1860s earned him the modern equivalent of $1.5 million. Poignantly, a ticket stub for a reading in London on February the 1st, 1870. Was to be among his last. A mere 4 months later, the great writer, the great performer of his own works, was dead, leaving an empty chair by his writing desk. This engraving became a Christmas bestseller that year. Nick Glass, CNN, in London.
All right, thank you, Nick. That's it for us. We'll see you back here at 10 for Newsroom.
Smerconish starts now.
I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. We welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. Merry Christmas, everybody. We know what the president wants for Christmas. Credit from all the media for all of his achievements. He tweeted, "Sadly, the fake mainstream media will never talk about our accomplishments in their end-of-year reviews. We're compiling a long and beautiful list." Well, Mr. President, stick around. I'm about to talk about your impact. Plus, with 750 million packages delivered by UPS this holiday season, a growing number are being stolen by so-called porch pirates. I'm about to talk to a man who has figured out how to fight one year into the Trump administration, and the end of any year is a time for assessing, especially this one. Mike Allen had an interesting observation this week in his Axios newsletter. He pointed out how little President Trump and perceptions of him have changed in the last year. Think about it. Roughly the same number of people support him today as did at the beginning of his administration. The Russian probe has remained constant. The elected Republicans remain skeptical of his leadership, but largely compliant. The elected Democrats, they still don't like him. The war with the media has never subsided, and neither have his Twitter fingers. All true. But there's a temptation in those observations to conclude that his administration, the passage of the tax bill notwithstanding, is static, gridlocked, that nothing's getting done in a polarized climate. That would be a mistake. In fact, if the pace of change continues for the duration of Trump's presidency, however long that might be, I think he could become the most consequential president in the modern era. Consequential meaning most important and significant, having the biggest overall impact. As with the criteria that Time magazine uses when determining its person of the year, this is not necessarily a good thing. Think about it. A Supreme Court position that was by rights a Democratic pick instead went to Trump. And his influence on shaping the federal judiciary is far greater than just Neil Gorsuch on the nation's highest court. He broke a Senate record this year by confirming a dozen new U.S. Circuit Court judges, the most during a president's first year in office in more than a century. At the rate that he's going, by next year, more than 12% of federal cases heard will be by Trump-appointed judges. Those picks will be his longest-lasting legacy. The tax bill that he's just signed is the first major overhaul of policy since the Reagan era. Whatever the effect, that won't be undone anytime soon. And by ending the individual mandate, President Trump has felled a major domino that will upset the economic viability of the Affordable Care Act. After all, how can you provide coverage for those with pre-existing conditions if you don't have everybody in the insurance pool? Trump has made cutting federal regulations a priority. He's revoked 67. He's delayed or derailed more than 1,500 others. He's pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, okayed the Keystone Pipeline, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and refused to recertify the Iranian nuclear deal. On his watch, the Iraq prime minister just declared victory over ISIS. The New York Times' Ross Douthat called it a war Trump won. In immigration enforcement, ICE has arrested more than 100,000 people who entered the U.S. illegally, 70% of whom were already convicted criminals. His State Department has undergone massive restructuring and shrinking, again, for better or for worse. And don't forget about the influence that ideologically driven members of his cabinet are having out of the spotlight. Betsy DeVos at Education, Scott Pruitt at the EPA, Ben Carson at HUD, Rick Perry at Energy, Jeff Sessions at Justice. No, Time magazine got it wrong when not naming the president its Person of the Year in 2017. By their own definition, the person who most affected the news and our lives for good or ill and embodied what was important about the year was absolutely Donald J. Trump. Joining me now to discuss Douglas Brinkley, he's a presidential historian and history professor at Rice University, and Larry Sabato, the director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry, he's getting lots done, but without popular support. Can that continue?
I doubt it. Look how difficult it was to get that tax bill passed, and he never could get Obamacare repealed. I know about the individual mandate being abolished, but that's not the same thing as abolishing Obamacare. And this was with a new presidency, usually coming with some kind of honeymoon, Republican majorities in both houses. I grant you, thin majority in the Senate, but still, most new presidents with a majority in both houses get a great deal done. I would say that while certainly Trump has accomplished some things, and I agree with you on the judiciary, he could have accomplished a great deal more if he were a different kind of president. I don't know about being the most consequential, but I'll tell you this, he's the most different president in the modern era.
I think everybody could agree on that, including the president. Douglas Brinkley, there's a lot to be said for that which takes place through inaction. Differentiate between action and inaction and what it means for this presidency.
Well, just take a look at what you said, pulling out of the Paris Accord. Yes, he did that. What does that mean in the end? And it means that Donald Trump's turned his back completely on climate change. What history may show is the overridingly important issue of our time. I mean, we've having unusual wildfires, hurricanes, glaciers melting. The planet is really alarmed right now, and Donald Trump decides, it doesn't exist. I don't want to believe and listen to the scientists. So by that very inaction this year, we're losing momentum. We're not educating the society on what to do to make some changes with climate change. I just picked that one. You could go all over and see, you know, he's gutting the Environmental Protection Agency by 33%. Okay, you could save some money right now, and you're also make a little money, you know, mining and leasing the public lands. What does that mean long term? What does it mean 100 years from now when we start just willy-nilly, you know, desecrating public lands for gouging quick gain profits? Conservation is always about our children's children. So there's a lot that went on this year that I don't think is going to shine well on history. It'll be remembered for Charlottesville, Pocahontas, NFL issues that divide the nation on race and identity.
You know what occurs to me, Larry Sabato, is that everything that Douglas Brinkley, the historian, says might be true, and yet it will be seen differently in different ends of the country. For example, the laundry list that he just rattled off of the negatives will be embraced by the 46% who put him in office.
Well, you're probably right about that, at least most of the 46%. Remember, he has dropped somewhat. He's in the mid-30s. Maybe you could exaggerate it up to 40 based on the fact that the polls often underestimate his support, but he has lost support. Why is that? Because, as Doug was suggesting, he is terribly divisive. Instead of trying to bring people together, and this is not an era when you can bring people together, but he could have won a few percent more. He could have won over some people who were kind of in the middle about him to begin with. Instead, because of what he has done and because of the way he does it, Michael, he has divided people, I think, more than at any time since perhaps the last year of Richard Nixon's presidency. That is not a good thing. It is not a good thing that we are now truly the divided states of America. Red states over here, blue states over there, and oddly enough, those purple competitive states, they're also choosing up sides.
Gentlemen, is it possible to put this in some historical perspective? I want to show you what the president said yesterday, and then, Douglas, I'll ask you to respond first. Roll the tape.
Legislative approvals, for which I'm given no credit in the mainstream.
The Secretary of Defense ship. I could go on and on. What did Donald Trump create this year? What is he going to be remembered for? I mean, John F. Kennedy, in his first year in office, Michael, did some bold things. He said, we're going to put a man to the moon by the end of the decade, and he started getting money put into states like places like Huntsville, Alabama, and Houston, Texas, infrastructure money on technology that worked with the space program. Kennedy created his first year the Peace Corps, Alliance for Progress. What's Trump known for? All over the world, he's seen as a bully. That's the net takeaway at the end of the year, and perhaps a bigot. And so it's very hard to see why history is going to be shining a great flashlight on a president with a 35% approval rating, the lowest since polls have been taken, whose big home run was a tax bill. That doesn't really excite people. It is a success at the end of the year, and he did get Gorsuch in, but it's been a very rocky first year.
Dr. Sabato, I think what he's achieved is that which he said he was going to do, which was largely, for better or worse, to reverse Obama-era policies.
Well, you're correct on that too, Michael. Let's talk about what that means, though. When you base your presidency around your base, your party base, and you are unable or incapable of bringing some people from the other party in the long run, that means the same thing is going to happen to Donald Trump. What karma that's happening to Barack Obama. Obama's presidency is being deconstructed piece by piece. Trump and his appointees are pulling out by the roots Obamacare's policies and regulations and programs. Look, at some point, I don't know when, is it 2020, is it 2024, can't tell you, but at some point you will have a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House again. And I can almost guarantee you that the Democratic base will insist that the Democratic president and Congress do the very same thing to whatever is left of Trump's legacy.
Can I just say, as a final word to both Douglas Brinkley and Larry Sabato, I worry most about a crisis. Knock on wood, we've really not had one in the first year of his watch, and I worry about what happens in a very polarized setting in one of those moments when, in another time, we would most certainly rally around the flag. Happy holidays to both of you. I really appreciate your expertise. Perfect guests for today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michael.
What are your thoughts? Tweet me at Smerconish. Go to my Facebook page. I will read some responses throughout the course of the program. What do we got, Catherine? Can you give the Trump bashing a break? Why not point out the positive facts versus negative opinions? Smerconish. Tricia, are you blanking me? Like, that was the most, I wrote every word of it myself. That was the most even presentation of what this year has been that you will find anywhere. That's not an MSNBC view. That's not a Fox view. That is a straight down the middle assessment of, for better or worse, here is what has just transpired. And it gets frustrating for me for people who hear what they want to hear what they think they hear, and just don't listen clearly. One more if we've got time for it. Your pan of Trump was discussed. See what I mean? This shows your true preferences. I mean, Rajiv, can you please get